friends, it's just Martine, and today I'm going to be reading books that I got via Amazon First Reads. Amazon First Reads is something that Amazon Prime members have access to. Starting on the first of each month, you have access to a selection of books that are being published the next month, and you get to choose one of them, and on some months, two of them, to download for free as part of your Prime membership. So I download one or two, depending on the month, of these every single month, and then I just let them sit there in my Kindle app because I have way too many Kindle books, and it's honestly terrifying. But these ones are really important to me for some reason. So I wanted to buckle down and actually read some of them. So that's what I did here. The first book that I finished reading for this is Constance. It's a book about clones, but it's also like a mystery thriller type situation. So it's a sci-fi thriller, essentially, much like Dark Matter by Blake Crouch is, but obviously very different premises. The way that the author came up with the idea for this book is he woke up one night and he was like, what would it be like if you had to solve your own murder? And so he did that through this story about cloning. I gave this book 5 stars for a couple of reasons. One, I loved the conversations that it had about cloning and bodily autonomy and what counts as being like alive or what counts as being a person. I thought there were lots of interesting points brought up across a variety of viewpoints, which I really enjoyed. You heard from people who were against cloning, you heard from people who were for cloning, you've heard from people who were indifferent about cloning. And I liked that all of them were represented like fairly for their beliefs. All of them had pretty good reasons for believing what they believed. And it also had some really interesting political implications. There was a Supreme Court case in the works, which as a forensic psychology student, I loved the fact that they were talking about the effect of technology on legal matters like that, and the fact that they mentioned Supreme Court cases and precedents that were happening in the time of the book. And again, it was also very political, not just in the legal sense, but in the like beliefs, what we're voting for type stuff. So there was a movement and a revolution, anti-cloning one, and the leader had a lot of poignant things to say about what it means to lead a revolution and to have a cause. And it was all very like interesting. It was just interestingly done. The mystery itself was really interesting. There were a lot of twists and turns and definitely a lot of unknowns in there. There was one point that was like a real brain hurt like situation with different characters, so that's always fun in books like these. Overall, it was just a really fun time. I liked the main character of Constance as well. I almost totally forgot to mention this. Constance, the main character, is a musician. She's a guitarist, and she was in this band, but then her band gets in this really tragic car accident, and one of her bandmates dies in the car accident, and then one is in like a lifelong vegetative comatose state. And the one who's left in the comatose state is the love of her life and the main leader of the band. So she has both a trauma associated with and a love for music. She's still trying to find who she is. After that, she's had surgeries, she's gone through all of these things, and she's flirting with the idea of like music is a healing process, but also it was because of the band that she lost this person that she really loved. And I loved the discussions about music and performance and art that were in this book, as well as like the idea of a collaborative group of artists and how that was discussed. In the course of the book, you end up meeting the only other band member who is like ostensibly unharmed, like physically, from the car accident, who also lost the love of her life. That was the one who died instantly in the car crash. And you see them work through things together. They've been out of contact for years and years. So that's really interesting and a healing experience for both of them, I think. It's crazy because Constance, how the book is set up, Constance goes in, her aunt basically invented cloning, like perfected it. And so as part of her aunt's will, she left all her family members the ability to get cloned, because cloning has been turned into this thing that's only for the elite and the very, very rich. It costs millions and millions of dollars to maintain a clone. And you go in for a refresh once every month so they can upload your current consciousness. And you're not supposed to be transferred into your clone, like your consciousness isn't supposed to be transferred into your clone if you've gone past a certain threshold. I think it's like 60 days. They're supposed to lock you out of your account and they can't like activate your clone when you die. And Constance is activated after 18 months. She hasn't had a refresh in 18 months, and she wakes up as her new self, but also her old self, and it's also a story about identity in that sense. And she's trying to figure out what happened in the past 18 months. When she woke up, it obviously meant that her original self had died, so she's trying to figure out what happened to her original self. And lots of things have changed in the 18 months that she didn't get a refresh. She's suddenly married, she's living in a totally new place, all of these things. And so she's just got a lot to sift through. And it was so good and such a complex book in some ways, but really easy to follow. I loved it. I loved it. This was a good time. And I haven't heard anybody else talk about it so far, so that's cool. For my next review, I read They Said They Wanted Revolution, and I gave it 4 stars. This is a memoir, not only about the author, but about her family. I think the subtitle's like a memoir about my family, because her parents took place in this huge revolution in Iran. They were originally students, so they were born in Iran, but they went to the United States. There were a bunch of students, especially in Berkeley, in the campus community of Berkeley, who were against the, I think it's pronounced Shah, at the time in Iran. So they worked on like protests and things in the United States. They went up to the top of the Statue of Liberty and like chained themselves there and stuff. And then eventually her parents went home to Iran, which is where she was born. And then her dad ends up executed for his involvement in this group. And her mom and some of her other family members flee as refugees into Turkey and eventually make their way back to the United States. So this is a story about that. I think the most emotional part for me was when she was talking about her mother, because although there are great conversations about grief that revolve around her father, she did know her mother longer, and her mother had a deeper direct impact on her life over time. So that was really beautiful and hard to read about. Also, an interesting thing of note, for me right now, it's technically February 3rd. I finished this yesterday, February 2nd, and it was published February 1st. And so the reason I've already read it is because the Amazon first reads, it's first reads. They give it to you like before it's officially published. I didn't realize how close to the publication date I was reading it, but that's super cool. I especially appreciated the section in this book that was a compilation of the author's like journals and such. That was like one of the last chapters, but I found that really interesting. Her writing was beautiful, and she had a way of discussing grief that I really loved. And she also does cover some of her time in writing this book. She took a trip back to Iran to visit her extended family when she was in her 20s, because she hadn't been there since she was like 2 or 3, and she wanted to see it and hear more about the experiences her parents had there. So that definitely added some depth to the book. And then I really loved the epilogue for this book, because since it was written really recently, the epilogue covers the storming of the Capitol, the US Capitol, her thoughts on that and the relationship to her parents and their work and the son that she was about to give birth to. So really beautiful stuff. But if you're looking for a memoir, you specifically want more stories from the Middle East, then I would definitely pick this one up. The next book I read for this is Hadley and Grace, and I ended up giving this 4 stars. It very much has a Thelma and Louise vibe that they even acknowledge in the book. Like, there are times in the book where there are news reports about Hadley and Grace, and they compare them to Thelma and Louise. Now, I'm not familiar with Thelma and Louise. Like, I've heard about it, but I'm not that familiar. I mainly drew that conclusion because the book did it for me. So like, there you go. And also because it was talked about in the author's note at the end. This is about 2 women. One is married to this guy, and he's very abusive, and she has a daughter and then kind of a son. So like, she definitely treats Skipper like a son, but she's really taking care of Skipper while his mom is not able to. And at the beginning of this book, Skipper's mom is like, all right, I'm ready to have him. And so her daughter and Skipper are going to go on a road trip in order to drop him off with his mom. I don't think it's said anywhere on the page, but it's very much portrayed that Skipper is somewhere on the autism spectrum. And he also has like some other health complications. And because her husband is so abusive, this woman, her name is Hadley, she's planning on using this as an excuse to escape her husband. And so that's why she's bringing her daughter with her on this trip secretly, is because she's going to drop off Skipper with his mom and then disappear with Maddie. On the other hand, you have this younger mother named Grace who works for Hadley's husband. Her husband is currently deployed, he's in the army, and he has a really big gambling problem, and they have a new baby, and their baby has colic. Baby Miles is upset all the time, and so she's really fraying because she's being a single parent right now. She's working for this kind of terrible boss, and Miles will never stop crying. Her husband, Jimmy, the last time he gambled away all their money, she said, you know, if there's a next time, I'm going to leave you. And he's done it again, and so she's preparing to up and leave and take Miles away and disappear. So both Hadley and Grace go to Hadley's husband's place of work looking for things to take with them, specifically money, and they run into each other. They happen to be there at the same time. Grace knows where he keeps his safe, and Hadley knows what the combination is. So they go, and they're like $2 million in this safe. Hadley gets hurt in the process of this, and so Grace is like, fine, I'll drive you part of the way, and they're very much not like positively reacting to each other, and so they start their road trip, and it spirals from there, and lots of things happen. It's kind of crazy, and you get to see the extent that a mother will go in order to protect her children. All around, it was a very positive experience. And if you like road trips and you like people forced into criminal situations and high stakes, for sure, it comes to light very quickly that the money that they stole from Hadley's husband, Frank, is actually laundered money. And so the FBI is like, oh my God, the money we were watching is gone. So now they're being chased by the FBI. So it's very high stakes, very action-packed, quick, and just good all around. The next book I read for this is The Marriage Code. It might just be called Marriage Code. I ended up giving it 4 stars. It's dual perspective romance, but there's also like a lot of other stuff going on. So it's told from the perspective of Emma, who is like this developer of like desktop applications and things, not applications, but like desktop technology. And meanwhile, there's Rishi, who is from India, and he is an app developer. And it's very much an enemies to lovers. When they originally meet, they have a terrible start. Basically, at the beginning, they seem to be fighting for the same job, and it gets really ugly. But by the end, that's not the case anymore. Emma, she gets the job that Rishi thought was going to be his, and she ends up moving to India for a year, to Bangalore, to lead the team that's going to develop this app, even though she has no app knowledge, because this specific app that they're working on is based on her desktop program that's like really near and dear to her heart, and is a literacy program, and it's pretty cool in and of itself. So she goes to lead the team, and Rishi is going to have to be her lead app developer because she has no experience with that, but they definitely hate each other. She's also in this new place, you know, she's had Indian takeout food back in America, but like she doesn't really know. One of the really cool things about Emma as a character is how open and sensitive she is to the cultural differences. So she really goes in with a mind of like, teach me how it's done here. She looks to other people, how should I behave here? Instead of going in assuming she knows exactly what she needs to do and not being open to changing her own behavior to fit more of the cultural norms. And I really appreciated that about her. I mean, she watched them for how they eat specific foods, and you know, she got advice on clothes and all this stuff. She just really enmeshed herself in the culture, and it made it a really rich reading experience because you also got exposed to a lot. Now, this is not written from an own voices perspective, as in somebody from India. However, the author of this fell into a similar situation in her own life that she's now made into this book, wherein she met her husband when she was working in India for a year. She also loved Indian takeout, and she had a lot of rich cultural experiences that Emma ends up having in this book. And so it is own voices in that way of being like the culture shock type of way. The author also wrote about the struggle of fitting into a traditional Indian family when you're an outsider, which is something that she also experienced. The basic premise of this is, you know, they're enemies to lovers, and that's going on. However, they strike a deal when they accept, okay, she's got the job and he's lead app developer, where she goes, I'll make it up to you, I'll help you with this code that you're trying to write, because he's been trying to write this web crawl to help him find the perfect wife, because his parents are getting upset at him that he's not accepting any of his matches that they're sending to him, and his little sister wants to get married, and it would look really weird for their family if she tried to get married. He wasn't already married. They've already had a slip up where his older brother got married to an outsider, and then the family lost all their money in this big snafu. So he's feeling a lot of pressure to find the absolute perfect wife for his family. So he's been trying to make this web crawl. Emma is much better at that, so she says, okay, I'll write your marriage code and we'll find the perfect person for you and your family. I have to say, once the characters learn to communicate with each other and not misinterpret literally everything the other person said, they typically did it very well. And I appreciated that because in romance books especially, miscommunication is like the ultimate plot. And it's not, like, it's not good. I hate it. I just rather, once people learn to communicate, they should continue communicating. They shouldn't regress. And these characters, they had trouble communicating in the beginning, but they really grew with that, and I appreciated it a lot. And so when they had issues in their relationship that were understandable issues, and they were still bad and still stressful to read about, but you knew, like, eventually they'll be able to understand what the other person is saying, and it will be okay, because they can communicate. This is also, it should be noted, a Fade to Black romance, which was nice for me. 4 stars. My final book for this, Innate Magic, I gave it 4.5 stars. There are a couple things that were kind of funny for me about this book. The primary one is that the main character of this book is my same age. And that feels so weird because we're dealing with such different things. He's graduating, he's going out into the real world. That is going to happen to me this year. However, as I'm looking towards graduate school, less so, you know? I'm still very much looking to be in a school setting, and he's just going out. You can tell from the title, A Magical World. This is definitely magical realism. Like, it's set in reality, although it's like historical fiction, magical realism. Historical magical realism? Is that a subgenre? If so, this belongs in that. Because it takes place in like 19-something in London. And the main character of this book I loved so much. I wish I could have given this book 5 stars, but there were just a couple things that didn't work for me for it, but 4.5, absolutely. Paul was everything to me. His relationship with his friend slash brother Thomas was everything to me. The implications of Paul's innate magic, his illegal innate magic that made him so charismatic and beloved by other people, was just fascinating to read about. The cloth magic that was described in here was so rich and good, and the plot was just wild. It's hard to tell you what this book is about because it's really just about this bisexual Catholic cloth mage who has illegal magic in his body too, and he has just graduated from school, and he's very poor, and he makes some run-ins with the wrong people because he thinks he's doing the right thing, and it turns out he's making some missteps. That's all you need to know to go into this book. I personally love the cover of this book. I found it so intriguing. I would continue the series, although I'm not exactly sure how it's going to continue, but I loved the characters so much that I would definitely read about Paul again, even if the plot is not fully there. Like, I just loved him, which is saying something because this book had longer chapters than some of the other books that I'm reading at this time. And I'd be like, all right, you know, a 16-minute chapter, I'm just gonna spend it with Paul. Paul and I are just gonna gallivant through this universe, and it was so fun and enjoyable. And let's see when it was published. It was published in November 2021. So this is a new one, folks. This is fresh. This is fresh. And yeah, historical fantasy, historical fiction, urban fantasy, historical urban fantasy, magical realism. Urban fantasy is the words I was looking for. I totally forgot urban fantasy was a thing. This is urban fantasy for sure, historical urban fantasy. But I loved the characters. The world was fascinating. I'd read more of it. And I think that's all you need to know about it. This went so well. Why am I putting off my Amazon Prime reads? I need to be reading them. These scored so well. These were all such good books. I didn't have a single flop in here. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a big thumbs up and comment down below. Do you ever get books from Amazon First Reads? And subscribe for more reading, writing, and college lifestyle content. And until next time, bye humans, bye!